Thank you, Mike. Yeah, moving on from elliptic a little bit, what we wanted to try and do is just sort of reflect on what's going on in the UK. And the first bit that I wanted to just cover was a very brief overview of the policy arrangements and exactly how we've got to where we are in the UK. Just to position, in case there's anyone there that doesn't know what and who the Low Carbon Vehicle Partnership is, we are, I think, unique in Europe in bringing together, hopefully, all of the stakeholders around one table to work on these issues of decarbonising transport and vehicles through whatever means possible. So electrification is clearly one of the key ones, but the internal combustion engine is not yet dead, and there are a lot of fuels and technologies out there that are part of the solution as well. So that's how we bring people together and try and understand the way forward in the most cost-effective manner to address the issues that Mike's flagged up about air quality and carbon emissions. The way we do that, and touching on a point that Mike made, is really firstly to create the community. The first thing to do, we found, is to actually get the stakeholders around one table and start sharing experiences, perspectives, and understanding each other's view on the world. One of the problems that we get at the moment is groups throwing rocks at each other from afar, and actually when you get them in the same room and start talking about it, there's a mutual respect. So we've got Greenpeace and Shell sat in the same room talking robustly and very, very openly about how we should decarbonise transport. Whereas in the media, you will see those as sort of potentially huge enemies. So create the community first, bring the people together. And as Mark said, one of the key ones we've got at the moment is the electricity supply community, the DNOs, the electricity generation, distribution, and indeed the charging infrastructure. All of that now needs to interface with the automotive industry in a very, very collaborative way. And gone are the days of thinking about just putting a fuel into your vehicle and that's it and you can walk away. It's actually now a very interactive process. So we've created an EV network group to start to build those bridges, understand the problems that we face, and undoubtedly in electric vehicles we do face some challenges, but they may not be the ones, there's analysis has shown that the capacity in the UK to generate electricity is there. It's the distribution that's the challenge, and actually in certain areas, that distribution challenge is going to hit us very, very quickly. In other areas, it'll take a long time. So we don't need very big clusters of electric vehicles to start to strain areas of the grid. And that's certainly one of the big challenges facing us. So that's something we're focusing on very actively. So it's create the community, building the understanding, sharing those issues, working on what the barriers and the opportunities really are. And then it's about influencing policy, trying to steer the agenda. And that's not just national government and even regional European government policy. It's actually at a local level as well, or indeed almost at an individual level, trying to steer consumers, in inverted commas, policy about how they choose vehicles. And then when we've got the solutions and we've lined them up and we're all sort of pointing in the right direction, part of our role is accelerating the market and trying to make those things happen and make them commercial and move forward. And the way I've approached this is really, and as my team know, I like to work in alliteration. So I've sort of identified the sort of 4 steps, the 4 Ps that we use. The first thing we need to have are the products. And we have got, and in the UK, in the bus market, we've got a huge range of very, very good, viable, commercially viable products available from top-notch manufacturers, fuel providers, technology providers. The products are there, but that's the first thing you need. You need to be identifying those products, and if they're not there, identifying the gaps, where the opportunities are. Key point, and it's come up with Hendrik's thing, one of the key issues is the proof. One of the things that the VW scandal has done for us is to flag up the need for representative data and a robust assessment of the vehicles and the transport we're doing. So we've all probably, as electric vehicle aficionados, we've all probably been in the situation where people have said, well, this electric vehicle, it's not actually clean because we're just displacing all of the emissions to the power station. Well, one of the things we did very early on here in the UK is look at the complete well-to-wheel picture of all of our buses. So we look at that comprehensive picture. We're starting to look at, and we look at comprehensive greenhouse gas assessment, and we're starting to look at actually the grams per passenger kilometre on a neutral basis. And I'm not here to sell electric or gas or diesel. I'm here actually to get lower carbon, lower emission vehicles. So let's look at them fairly and understand where different technologies work and where they are best suited, because it isn't one size fits all. So proof, the performance, that is absolutely critical, getting clear, robust evidence. When you've got that evidence, it's an awful lot easier to start to steer the policies. One of the challenges our government had in the UK, they wanted to incentivise cleaner vehicles. If they can't prove that they are cleaner using a robust and independent process, they are very, very unlikely to be able to give them a grant because of state aid rules and all those things. So actually having that evidence is critical to allow the policymakers to move forward and achieve the directions that they want to go. So policies are the next area. And when we've got the products, we've got the proof that they work, we've got the policies in place, it is about promotion. And that's actually one of the things we're doing here today, is promoting the low emission bus opportunities that exist. And Mark will talk to you about the latest in a series of reports that we've got. One key point though is in the development of policy and the development in the UK, it's a long process. These things do not happen overnight. Personally, I've been working in this territory with the bus market here in the UK since 1996. 20 years it's taken us to get to where we are now. And we've had a series of steps. We started out defining a representative test back in 1996, and that was all about air quality on Oxford Street, which resonates today as it did then. We then defined what a low emission, low carbon bus was. We then managed to get an accreditation scheme that was adopted by UK government. It was adopted by the operators first and then taken on board by government. We then got funding to identify and to support the uptake of those buses. Within that funding, we identified some challenges in the way that buses were supported in the UK, and we addressed those with an additional tool, the BSOG incentive, which I won't go into the details. We've defined future roadmaps for technology. We've then revised and refreshed the scheme, adapted the test process, developed the real-world testing, and we now have another scheme that's just completed in terms of funding round. And we're in that phase now where 40% of the vehicles last year were actually low carbon emission buses. They met these criteria. So 40% of the UK market was actually achieving beyond the minimum legislative requirements. And I think that this is one of the key things that we've identified. It's not just London. London is this icon, it's a worldwide icon. The red double-decker bus is known literally the world over. But this actually has been adopted across the UK. You can see here, firstly, the range of technologies that we've got, everything from hybrid, smart ancillaries, biomethane powered buses, full electric buses, even hydrogen fuel cell buses. They are all in play in full commercial operation around the UK and across the whole of the UK. And I think that's a really important message, that electrification is a key component, but electrification itself is a spectrum from full electric all the way down to a mild hybrid, and each of those technologies will have a sweet spot for different operators and for different routes, and that's one of the messages we want to take out there. And this is how that growth has expanded. One of the challenges for the UK market has been, in some areas, that the volume of new bus sales has actually dropped over the last few years. And that's a challenge. The vehicles on our roads are actually getting older rather than younger. I think the average age of a vehicle here in the UK has actually, in the passenger car market, has actually increased by 3 or 4 months over the last few years, because people, the vehicles we're making are more reliable and more robust, and people are hanging on to them a bit longer. Things like the recession obviously impact on the ability of organisations to purchase new buses. What we have done in parallel with that is really create a support mechanism, and as members of the Department for Transport here today, and they've been instrumental in supporting this market in the UK, to the point where last year, as I say, 40%, and at the moment, year to date in 2016, I think it's 44% of the vehicles coming onto the road are actually of the latest low carbon, low emission generation, supported by government operators, and they're not all given grants, but the operators have embraced this very significantly. I think important is how we've done that, and it's a very robust scheme. It's taken an organisation and a collaborative organisation such as the LowCVP to bring together the players and agree how we measure these things. So we create a certificate for each type of bus that gives us a very transparent picture of how that performs on a real world representative cycle. And those two terms tend to get a bit polluted, but this is a very representative cycle. And I think even more so now, that's important where, I think Henry touched on it, and we see it in the passenger car market. The claims that we're all used to seeing about MPG, miles per gallon, or sorry, litres per 100 kilometre of our vehicles, and we know that consumers have sort of lost touch with, they've lost faith in the numbers that the regulated tests produce. We're getting exactly that same issue on range. Electric range and claims from manufacturers that we've got 300, 400 kilometres electric range, well, that's only as good as the test under which that's been carried out. So we not only measure the fuel consumption on a representative test, we're measuring the electric range on a representative test, and actually splitting that down by different types of driving. The inner city, London, Oxford Street driving will give you one effective range, the rural operation will give you another. And those have become they're absolutely critical to the operators. They can't enter into a service if they're not sure whether the bus will get to the end of the route or not. So those things, it's about having really, really good, transparent, realistic data. And then what we've done is really try and steer the policy to drive the agenda in the direction we want. UK air quality, right now, air quality is probably the #1 issue in the UK, as Mike said. That's the thing that's exercising the government probably most actively right now. But we have a legislative requirement in the UK to meet low carbon direction. So the way we have created the funding, #1, it's got to be clean. And that means it's got to be Euro 6. And this is Euro 6 heavy duty. Those are very clean buses. If we're looking for a 98% reduction in NOx from our vehicles on the road, electric is one. You can get 100% reduction. You can get 97, 98% reduction by having a Euro 6 diesel bus operating in a city centre. And we shouldn't ignore those technologies and only focus on the electric ones. The electric has a great place, and it really does work very well. The overall carbon saving on a well-to-wheel basis here in the UK with UK grid electricity is around about, I think it was about 80%, between 60 and 80% depending on the vehicle. You can get very similar, in fact probably even better carbon reductions on a well-to-wheel basis with a biomethane bus, which runs, again, Euro 6 compliant, very, very low NOx. So there are different ways of skinning the cat, so to speak, but a very transparent, technology neutral perspective. And then what we have had, we do agree, zero emissions capability is going to be critical. Ultimately, zero emissions will be where we go. So actually supporting the development of more and more zero emission operation, and that might be through full electric buses or through plug-in hybrids or partial electrification. So there's a lot of options there that really will fulfill the widest range. In fact, every bus and every route has a technology option for it. And the way we've been doing the promotion, so we've got the policies in place, we've got the products in place, the promotion has been the focus for this year. We've run a number of reports, and all of those are on our website. One of the things we did, there's a major show in September, and we ran a low emission bus showcase, and Dan, to his credit, drove all of this. And we had examples of all of those technologies on show, people riding them. The whole of the low carbon vehicle industry here in the UK came to that show and experienced this range of technologies available to us. And we have an aspiration amongst ourselves and the LowCVP. 2020, we want every new bus sold in the UK to be a low emission bus, to meet these criteria. That's our aspiration. We're at 50% of the market, almost 50% of the market today, and we don't think that's unreasonable. I'd like to just compare that briefly. In the UK, the low emission car market, the ultra low emission vehicles, plug-in vehicles, they are at 1.3% of the new car market. And their aspiration is for 5% of the new car market to be ultra low emission vehicles. So we, as a bus industry, in my view, are about 10 years ahead of where the car industry is in terms of uptake. And we're very much in the how do we get the mass market, how do we get that whole market to flip to these new technologies. We also produced a guide to try and bring this information to the people who need to know it. We, around the table here and in this room, we're probably all familiar with this. I'm probably not telling you anything you don't know, but actually every operator out there, every local authority, they need to understand what is available and what can work. And that's what we're focusing on, is trying to deliver the information to the people who can make a difference to the mass market uptake. And I'm very pleased that we've been very, very well supported by both the operators industry and indeed the manufacturers. A number of them are here today as well. And then we run a series of events. So today we've got this summit, obviously trying to bring this and build on the Elliptic programme. There's a Zero Emission Bus Conference at the end of the month that we are chairing some sessions. We're presenting at Low Carbon Britain, which is branching out into the much wider sustainability market and group. We've got our working group meeting. We run 4 working group meetings a year, and Mike chairs those. The next one is in January, and we're also doing a workshop around that. We're launching the 3rd phase of the report in February, and then we've got workshops that we're running. So, this is not something you can say, here's a report, we've done our job. It's absolutely communication, communication, communication amongst stakeholders and out to the influencing policymakers and to the market. So I guess in summary from my perspective, it's a long story. It's 2 decades of work on this to get us to where we are, and we've certainly got another, decade or more to go to take us to where we want to be. It's about long-term collaboration to develop and identify the products we need. It's about the proof, evidencing that those products work for the operator, for the guy who needs to use them, and for the passenger. And that's the focus of our next phase of work, is how does the passenger engage with these new technologies? It's also about influencing the policy. Those policies are critical in terms of the way that we take up these technologies, and then promoting those to the wider market. I will leave it at that point and hand over to Mark Munday to introduce the new report that we've got.